Hello, everybody. So, this is my second round of trying to do this for the first part of my lecture because the video for some reason got age restricted. I don't know why. So, I'm trying again, and hopefully, this one doesn't get age restricted and it works for you. So, I apologize for the delay on this one. Okay, so let's try again. So, again, get your note paper out. Let's take notes. Here we go. So, we're going to be talking about Lord of the Flies today. We're going to talk about the author, we're going to be talking about the book itself, and we're going to be talking about what we're going to be doing with it. Okay, so about the author. William Golding was born in Cornwall, England in 1911. So we've moved from Egypt and China and the United States and the Caribbean and South America, and now we're going to Britain, okay? And the story, though, takes place in the South Pacific, but it is a British story. Or at least it seems like it's the South Pacific, or maybe the Caribbean. It's hard to say. Anyway, Golding lived a sheltered, isolated life as a child. I believe he was an only child, and his parents were very strict, and so he was a pretty lonely kid. But he knew he wanted to write by age 12. He loved reading and he loved books. But like a lot of people who want to be artists and creators, a lot of times society or families pressure us to do something more practical. So when he got to Oxford, he studied science for a couple years. But after a while, he's like, no thanks. So he stopped and began to pour all his energies into English literature, his original dream. Now, unfortunately, something happened a few years after he graduated. It's a thing called World War II. So that broke out, and England was being attacked much earlier than we were. In fact, we started the war closer to the end of it than the beginning, and so he decided to enlist, join the British Navy in 1940, and he participated over many years. This is about 4.5 years he was at war. He participated in many violent battles, including the invasion of Normandy. And if you don't know anything about Normandy, it is incredibly an important historical period. Saving Private Ryan starts out at that scene. It was a very deadly day, but it was also a day that led to the turning of the tides of the war for us to win. Okay, so anyway, but he was a lieutenant on a command rocket warship, and so he saw a lot of horrible things that traumatized him, and so that really did affect him. And he was in command, so that means he felt, I'm sure, very responsible for what happened with those gunner ships, okay, or rocket ships, excuse me. And so after the war was over, it really changed his view about human nature. He came to believe that we had a very dark side to us, that we were not the naturally good beings he thought we were. Because look at all the things he saw. You know who started World War II on the European theater, right? Not a good man and did lots of horrible things, yes? And so he was very traumatized from all of that. So I can't say his name or this video might get flagged for being inappropriate for you. So hopefully you know. The word starts with an N and ends with an I, okay? And the man's name starts with an H and ends with an R, okay? Anyway, now this was not a unique view. There were many authors who also thought that mankind was lost and messed up, and they were traumatized from the war, both World War I and World War II. Now, World War I artists, they thought that art was going to be able to be a way to help heal our souls, to heal our wounds, right? In fact, this whole movement called Dada is a response to that. But artists of World War II started to lose hope in that. World War I, they thought it was the war to end all wars. There would be nothing so bad again. But, oh, no. World War II proved that to be not true. And in fact, a lot of authors thought that maybe we weren't salvageable at all. And that's a question. Do you think, we're going to find out through the story, do you think Golding thinks that we're unsavable, that we're too messed up, or does he have some hope for us? And that's something that you're gonna have to tell me. But he definitely thought he definitely thought we were dark. Hopeless, I don't know, you tell me. But there's many other classic books that are and art that was a response to this, like Joseph Heller's Catch-22, Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, which is a great book about PTSD. And Kurt Vonnegut Jr. really was in World War II. He was captured by the German army and put into a meat locker in a basement. And because of that, he actually lived. So there is some real stuff in that story about the worst bombing ever in the European theater of the war was the bombing of Dresden. It had more explosions than the nuclear bomb did. And it was like the moon, he said, when it came out. Everybody was gone. Even the oxygen, for a lot of people, was just burned away. So it was a really bad battle, but he survived. And this book is kind of his kind of way of dealing with that. 1984 is a response to that, too, by George Orwell. And this was about how George Orwell thought that he was worried about totalitarianistic kinds of regimes taking over and turning us all into thought slaves, right? In fact, if you've ever heard the phrase Big Brother, it came for that. Brave New World's another story about a reaction to the wars, and it's not quite as bleak, but he's talking about our human nature. And all those books were talking about our human nature, what they thought after World War II. And Lord of the Flies is no different. Albert Camus wrote a book called The Plague that was a reaction to this also. He also wrote a book called The Fall, which we may or may not read this year, it depends. That also was a response to that. That one at least has humor. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead was a fun one that definitely is talking about our human nature, but uses a lot of humor to poke fun at us about the human condition. And as I said, the whole Dada art movement was a part of that as well, after World War I. Talking about, like, war doesn't make sense. Why should art make sense? Life doesn't seem to make sense, right? Anyhow, some more about the author. So William Golding said, when I was young, I had some airy views about man, but I went through the war and that changed me. Okay. He said the war was unlike any other fought in Europe. It taught us no fighting, politics, or the follies of nationalism, but about the given nature of man. And that's what we're exploring here. This whole book, we're going to be looking at what do we think about our state of nature? Who are we? Are we more corrupt or are we more kind, right? Where are we on the sliding scale here? And that's something we're going to have to explore. What does Golding think? It definitely thinks dark stuff, but again, totally lost, you tell me. And you can understand why he might, because he saw things like this, and this, and this. Oop, sorry, that was a picture of a nuclear bomb. I'm not going back because I've had to do this twice. So he saw, the nuclear bomb. There's actually references to the nuclear bomb in the story, and how it, destroyed things. Oh, weird. Oh, oops, there it is. Okay, anyhow, so about the author. Some more. In 1983, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Is that a big deal? Heck, yes, it is, right? So he got to win $1 million and that gold medal and the prestige of being one of the very few people that have ever gotten this. Only one a year, But he died about 10 years later at the age of 81. But he was a very important author. He didn't just write Lord of the Flies. He wrote a lot of other books. They tend to be very dark. In fact, this is not his darkest book. It has been banned from time to time because of the darkness in it, but it is not banned now. And we'll talk about, why it was banned as we're reading it. Okay. And the novel was published in 1954, so it's all, it's pretty old now. It's about 70 years old, or a little over 70, 71. But it was rejected 20 times before it got published, so there's a lesson in not giving up, right? And I bet you all those publishing houses that rejected him are crying now, because I want you to just think about the millions of books that have been sold across the world, because this is almost everybody in an English-speaking country has read this in high school, so that's a lot of books. And they've had to buy them again and again because they get lost or destroyed or used up. But it wasn't successful until the 1960s. I almost wonder if it wasn't successful until the movie came out. I'm not sure. And even now today, some people criticize it as being too didactic. You look that up, and inflexible. But in fact, even like John Green from Crash Course poo-poos it, but I think he has a shallow view on it, and he needs to think about it a little deeper. I would definitely take him to task if I ever met him about that one. I'm sure people already have. Anyhow, now about the novel. It's incredibly influential to other novelists, filmmakers, artists, and musicians. Like, here's a book of poetry called Shadows and Tall Trees. That's a chapter title. So there's clearly a nod to that. U2, one of the biggest bands from the 1980s and 90s, their very first album when they were young, when they were like between 18 and 20, they had read this book and it highly influenced them. And the book is called Boy. The record's called Boy because it's a reference to the boys in Lord of the Flies, and they even have a song title called Shadows and Tall Trees. Okay, Iron Maiden maybe even did. I'm not sure. He was British. I know he probably had to read this in school, the band guys that in Iron Maiden. It's an English band. But maybe it could be a biblical reference. Hard to say. SpongeBob SquarePants even has an episode where they talk about the conch. That's a Lord of the Flies allusion in there. As we talked about before, Simpsons has done it. There's even a post-punk band from Britain and France that's all women. They name themselves Savages, and they have said in interviews that the name is directly from Lord of the Flies because they use the word savages in that. And they're saying, yeah, girls can be violent and awful too, because just so you know, there are no girls in this book, at least not human girls in any literal sense. There might be femininity, and there are female pigs, but there are no women or girls in this story. Okay, so some people think that Golding was saying this is how boys and men are, but I don't think that's what he's saying. And in fact, he says that's not what he's saying. But also, they're kind of playing on that. So, and that's just a few to name. Okay. So, some themes that we're looking out for when we're reading the story. It's all about human nature that we'll be looking at, but different elements like the need for civilization. He's definitely been making a point about that, although he would have spelled it with an S. In British English, they spell that with an S. It's not a Z, right? Or a Z, as they would say. Innocence and the loss of it. That's definitely in there. Like, are we innocent or are we fallen? The loss of identity, the struggle and need for power and power over others. The fear of the unknown. Fear is a big one in this story. Blindness and vision, like literally and metaphorically. Okay, so those are some things to look out for. Now, this book is also satire. I want you to tell me, before I tell you what satire is, in the chat box, what do you know about satire? Do you know what it is? If not, you can tell me how you don't, but if you think you do know, tell me. All right, so here's the textbook answer. Satire is the use of humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticize people's stupidity or vices, particularly in the context of contemporary politics and other topical issues. And this story is no different. He's not using humor, right? Not all satire is funny, okay? Like this is a satirical gif based off of a painting, okay? But the Lord of the Flies is not funny, but it's definitely using irony, and some would say exaggeration, and definitely he's ridiculing and exposing and criticizing our human stupidity and vices in some way, okay? And in fact, he's satirizing something very specific, not just human beings, but also a specific group of people, the British, and he's one of them, so he's allowed to criticize them. Because what he's doing is he's commenting on the naivete of the British who thought that extreme evil, like those people in Germany, were something that the British were immune to. They could never do something as bad as those people in Germany did during World War II. They thought they were morally superior, that their race was superior. It could never happen here. But Golding says, I beg to differ, sir. Take your tea and spill it, okay? So what he does to kind of poke fun and say, you guys could be equally as not good, okay? He uses the opposite of what Over the Garden Wall did. Over the Garden Wall, right, used Dante's Inferno to make a children's story, but in this case, Golding takes a children's story to make a more adult story in Lord of the Flies, okay? So this is the original story, and I'm going to have you guys do an Edpuzzle that explains more, but just to give you a little synopsis, this is about a story about some three boys that are shipwrecked on an island, and adventure ensues. By the way, this book was written in the mid-1800s, and it was a story he would have read. And it's totally out of date now, okay? It's got some racist problems, okay? Some bigoted problems. But anyway, there's three main boys, Jack, Peterkin, and Ralph. Pay attention to those names, okay? And it has a happy ending with a dash of naive racism, but everybody gets off the island, and it's all good, and they have a good old time. There's no fighting between the boys, and it's all great. Now with Lord of the Flies, it's about boys who are plane wrecked as opposed to shipwrecked on an island, and adventure ensues. But then there's trouble. They do not all get along. And there are three main boys. I would say maybe even a fourth. Okay, there's a fourth one too. But the three main ones that are in it the most are Jack, Piggy, and Ralph. Now, we don't know Piggy's real name ever. That is a nickname they give him to be mean because they are fat-shaming him. I wonder what his name really is. Anyway, in the ending, well, we'll see. I don't want to give that away. But, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, I'll tell you that. Now, what are we going to do with this story? You guys are going to be writing two things. You're going to write an argumentative essay on the meaning of the story in relation to our human nature. looking at the illusions, imagery, and conflict within the story, and and other nonfiction sources. We'll be looking at some pieces by Mengzi and Xunzi, these ancient Chinese philosophers. We'll be looking at Thomas Hobbes, the first modern philosopher. That you might know already from AP Euro if you're taking AP Euro. We might look at Rousseau too. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is a French Enlightenment, Romantic era philosopher. We'll look at some scientific articles and a news article about a real life thing that happened not too long ago of some boys getting shipwrecked in the South Pacific. And then we're going to be using those to make a synthesis essay about what you think about our human nature. You're not going to just be arguing what Golding thinks. You want to be arguing what you think, but you'll be using in part what Golding thinks as part of your argument. Either you agree with them or you're going to use them to argue against. Okay. You're also going to do a choice piece, a creative piece for the illusions that you notice in the story. Okay. And that you focused on. Details will follow. I'll give you an example when we get to the end of the story. Okay. So I'll show you some examples. And it's just a fun way to talk about the illusions in the story in a way besides writing an essay. Okay. Now you're going to have to do errands. I'm sorry. I know you're crying, but it is what it is. If I don't make you, you're not going to learn how to think deeply. This is a way to force you to interact with the text, to dig deeper into the meaning, and to be prepared for being able to write about the story, being able to have good conversations about the story. So I'm not doing it to you, I'm doing it for you, FYI. Anyhow, so once we begin, you're going to be reading 2 chapters at a time with a Socratic summary that follows up. And I'll be passing out a pacing guide to you when we pick up the book next week. Okay. There are going to be 3 ARNs per chapter, so that's 6 ARNs each time. Okay. And for every chapter, you're going to be adding at the end a thematic summary and 2 vocab terms defined. You need to look up words you don't know. That's important. And the thematic summary is just helping you kind of get ready for like thesis statement writing. Okay. There's going to be about 2 Socratic seminars a week generally. So that's 4 chapters a week. So you're going to have a lot of homework now. Okay. I will give you class time though. I'll give you like at least 1 day, if not 2 days a week to do some reading. Okay. And there's 12 chapters in the book, so this will take about 3.5 weeks to do the reading. Okay. You want to make sure that your ARNs have questions for the Socratic seminar in them, or you're going to lose points. Okay. That's super important that you know that. We've talked about that before, but I'm just making an emphasis. And you want to make sure you're always looking out for meaning, you guys. We're not here to just like make predictions and ask, very generic textbook questions. I want your ARNs to be talking about what does this mean? And I don't want you to be asking, why did Golding put this here? No, that doesn't matter. What I want you to do is to go, okay, what do you see? What meaning do you see in the choices that are here? Okay, so let me show you some examples, okay? And then the hows we're going to be focusing on are illusions, of course, because the part 2 of this lecture is about all the illusions in the story, the big ones to be looking out for, that you can have some choice to be looking out for. But you're also going to be looking at imagery, symbolism, internal and external conflict, okay? And those can all be mixed. There are going to be illusions that have imagery in them. There are going to be illusions that are symbolic. There are going to be illusions that have to do with conflict, okay? So they can be mixed. Now, let me show you a couple of examples. Now, this is the very beginning of the book, so I'm not spoiling or anything. It's the very first paragraph. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be finding quotes as you read, right? And I'm going to pick this first one. So we're looking at this intro. It says, the boy with the fair hair lowered himself down the last few feet of a rock and began to pick his way towards the lagoon. Though he had taken off his school sweater and trailed it now from one hand, the gray shirt stuck to him and his hair was plastered to his forehead. All around him, the long scar smashed into the jungle was a bath of heat. So the long scar is from the plane crash, okay? And it's really hot in the jungle. So that's the quote I picked out. And I'm noticing some allusions already. I'm thinking about a biblical lens here. There's probably some biblical allusions going on here. So on my sticky note, I put, or if you have to do it on a separate piece of paper, that's fine too. But you just put the first few words in the last word or two so that you know what the quote is and I know what the quote is, okay? And then you, of course, put the page number in case the sticky note gets lost.
Elijah,
sorry, hang on.
Shoka, can you dial 64237? Elijah, dial 64237.
Anyway, I noticed that this has got some dark imagery. Notice I don't have the labels anymore. You don't have to either, but if you don't, you need to underline the how and underline the question so I can find it easily when I'm grading it. So anyway, I underlined dark imagery because that's my how. Dark imagery of a scar from the plane crash, also referring to how hot the island is. So that's also part of the imagery, right? And so through the imagery, I'm thinking, is he trying to say something about how the boys corrupted the island, scarring it, right? Talking about how it's got a scar, and I also notice how that's personification, right? Because normally, islands don't have scars, living things get scars, right? And so is he trying, and scars never go away, right? It's showing it's wounded. So has the boy's arrival somehow wounded the island, right? Was it this pristine paradise like the Garden of Eden that they came down, right? So with a biblical lens, possibly referencing the dark underworld, right? Juxtaposed with the Garden of Eden being invaded, right? It seems like that's what he's doing. Maybe he's trying to say something about, and as the fact that it's falling too, right? Are these like fallen angels or something, right? I could really dig into this kind of, is he making some reference, especially because there's so much more of this in the story. It's in there. Okay, so I'm already giving you an illusion. You can even see further down, it talks about a witch-like cry, right? Again, that could be giving you that kind of hot underworld commentary there. So that's kind of an example of what I'm looking for. And you have to do 3 of those per chapter. Now, for each chapter, you have to do you have to prove to me you looked up at least 2 words you don't know and do a thematic summary. So here's an example. So I've got the words pallidly and clamber. So pallidly is an adverb. It means lacking sparkle or liveliness. It's a reference to being pale. Pallid means pale. And so that's in there somewhere. And then clamber, that means climbing awkwardly. So clearly one of the characters was climbing awkwardly. Okay, and then here's a thematic summary. In chapter 1, through the focus of who will be chief on the island, Golding seems to be arguing that human beings desire control and order. So the thematic summary is trying to figure out what is the author trying to argue through this chapter. Okay, and here's a template you can use. So how to write this down? By looking at whatever the specific events or prevalent illusion or devices that you noticed a lot in this chapter, Golding seems to be arguing, illustrating, suggesting, or some other kind of verb that whatever it is you think he might be saying about human nature. And this is to help you prep up for maybe having a topic sentence or some claim in your essay that you're going to be writing about what you think Golding is arguing. Okay, so that's the end of that. Part 2, please move on to that. Hopefully this one works this time. I'm so sorry. It was a delay. I can't believe it was blocked on you guys. I don't know if it's because of the biblical illusion stuff or the World War II stuff I talked about, but here, hopefully that didn't ruin your day too much. All right, move on to part 2 now, guys. Bye-bye.